I'm Sam.
And this is Gabe.
And this is Coaster Wars.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Coaster Wars podcast, the only podcast where you will see multiple coasters paired together that make zero sense, but for once, this episode actually makes sense.
And I'm so excited I get to talk about my number one coaster now. I'm excited.
Oh, yes. Two coasters that actually should be talked about in the same conversation. We don't do that on this podcast, but this time we do, so.
Yeah. We'll have a couple mixed in that actually make sense, but majority of them, nah. It's just two coasters me and Gabe want to talk about, in all honesty.
Pretty much. We do have a good one today. We got an old RMC, one of the first RMCs ever constructed, versus the newest RMC constructed. Two good coasters. Interesting aspect about this episode, I have not ridden your coaster credit, and you have not ridden mine. So it's another episode like that.
I know, it's going to be making it really interesting comparing these two, especially trying to convince each other that ours is the best, or better coaster, and I think mine is, but I guess that's up for debate.
Well, no, I was going to say that. Coming right off the bat, mine is definitely the underdog in this battle. Well, it's just an older RMC. You know, it was before they were really starting to experiment and explore with different elements. It only features one inversion, and it doesn't even feature the RMC trains. That's how old it is. So it's definitely punching a little bit below or a little bit above its weight class. But I think it's definitely going to pull out some surprises here and there, so.
All right, with that, why don't you actually introduce our fighters today?
Yeah, sounds good. In the red corner, standing at a height of 140 feet and reaching a top speed of 62 miles per hour, hailing from the hills of Pennsylvania and the RMC gym, it is Wildcats Revenge! And in the blue corner, standing at a massive height of 179 feet and reaching a top speed of 70 miles per hour, hailing from the quarry walls of San Antonio, Texas and the RMC gym, it is the Iron Rattler! Let the fight begin. So, obviously the credit that I'm bringing to this episode today is going to be Iron Rattler. It is located down at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. And it is the second RMC iBox coaster that RMC ever did. And it's their second conversion as well.
And the coaster I am bringing is Wildcats Revenge, which is also an RMC, but on the opposite side of the spectrum. It was built in 2023, so it is one of their newest creations to be out there. It's at Hershey Park in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So at the beginning of this episode, I really was like, I think Wildcats the better one. But after watching a POV, Iron Rattler is not exactly anything to scoff at. It actually looks like a really good ride. And I think Wildcats Revenge, like, we and Gabe have talked about this. The number of elements that you have does not necessarily make the better ride. It's not quantity over quality. It's definitely quality over quantity. And so even though Wildcats Revenge has 4 inversions, one thing I will say is that they're not the best inversions we've ever had before. So I think that is a little knock on the ride itself.
Yeah, basically what you're looking at when you're comparing these two coasters is 10 years of innovation. Because, like you said, Wildcats Revenge was 2023, so that's this year. And then Iron Rattler is 2013. So what you're looking at is 10 years of evolution for RMC and the roller coaster community and construction in general. The biggest thing is that with these two coasters, I think is what we're talking about here is the size and speed difference. I think Iron Rattler is massive at 180 feet tall and 70 miles per hour. So I think the first drop is definitely going to be something that's better on Iron Rattler. But the thing with Wildcats Revenge is Wildcats Revenge pacing is off the charts. I mean, it is crazy. Just watching a POV of that coaster. where Iron Rattler kind of has some pacing issues that we do have to talk about and address. The other advantage that Iron Rattler has over Wildcats Revenge is it doesn't have the RMC trains. I've made it well known I am not a fan of RMC restraints at all. And Iron Rattler doesn't have that. So, definitely some advantages to Iron Rattler, definitely some advantages to Wildcats Revenge. Definitely two completely different roller coasters. Even though they're RMC and they're RMC conversions, they are not really the same at all. They're completely different. I think that's a good reason to compare these two coasters, but it's also cool to look at, RMC's growth. And 10 years in the roller coaster industry is huge in this day and age. I mean, stuff changes so fast. So, there's a lot that has become different over these years with these coasters. So,
with that, why don't we kind of go in order here, and we'll start with Iron Rattler and really dig into what RMC was, and then we can get into what they've become.
Yeah, absolutely. So Iron Rattler, like I said, was constructed in 2013. It is their second conversion. So the very first conversion they ever did was the Texas Giant down at Six Flags over Texas in Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth area. So this was their second attempt. They finally threw an inversion into a roller coaster. But the first thing I gotta talk about is the trains. So these are not RMC trains. When RMC was first developing their company, they decided to outsource, and these are actually Gerstlauer produced trains, and they are the most comfortable roller coaster trains I've ever been on an RMC. and it's so much better. Like, they should have just stuck with these. Like, I understand RMC wants to do everything in-house to help save money and make the roller coaster construction cheaper. But these trains were just absolutely awesome. It's basically all it is a lap bar. So imagine basically like almost similar to like a B&M clamshell restraint, like on their hyper coasters. Mm-hmm. So almost imagine like a hyper coaster restraint, but with RMC ejector airtime and an inversion.
Damn.
So this is a coaster where you almost, like, if you do the whole thing where you, like, pop your knees up a little bit and stuff, like, you almost feel like you're going to fall out of the damn thing. And it just, it feels, a little bit more intense on the airtime side of things. I really enjoyed this roller coaster. However, I don't think it was the best roller coaster at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. Now, that's a bit of a hot take, but they just built a dive coaster there that I had a lot of fun riding, and it was very enjoyable. This coaster is definitely up there, but when it comes to RMCs in general, this is actually a little bit low on the RMC list. Like, I'd put Lightning Rod, I'd put Goliath, obviously Iron Gwazi and Steel Vengeance would be above this roller coaster, and stuff like that. So it's not their best, but it's, like I said, it was one of their first. They were still experimenting and developing their trade. However, the one thing I will say with this coaster, it has one of the craziest first drops of all time on any roller coaster. And you watch the POV of this, right?
Yes.
So you can see that little bit of a twist in it right at the very beginning?
Yep.
In the back row, you get absolutely, especially in the back row if you're on the right-hand seat, you get absolutely thrown to the side. Like, it is aggressive. Because the Gerstlauer trains are fairly long and fairly heavy, so they gain speed pretty fast. So in that back row, you get absolutely, like, yeeted out of your seat. It is so aggressive. It is just so much fun every time. I definitely think the first drop on this roller coaster is probably going to be better than Wildcats Revenge, just because it is almost 200 feet tall.
Oh, yeah.
And then just the way it kind of like swoops down right next to the quarry wall, and there's like not a straight piece of track on this first drop for some reason. And so you get some really good laterals, and you get some really, really good airtime, and you get just some really good G-forces at the bottom because the pullout is a very tight one.
Yeah, I think with this coaster, from what you're describing, does a curve drop really well because we talk about how we hate them so much, but I think the reason that we hate them so much is because they take away that floater feeling and then give you G's on the way down, which is like that's not what we want in our first drop. We want pure floater, like straight down. So this somehow still gives you floater, but still also whips you out of your seat at the same time. And that just sounds like a crazy experience. And like you said, makes the first drop just amazing. And then, yeah, it's an unfortunate thing about first drops is that bigger is almost always better. You have to be really good at first drops. The only thing I can think of that, like, is small but still somehow has the feeling of a big drop would probably be the drop on Maverick. But part of that just might be how steep that damn thing is.
Yeah, definitely. The thing with Iron Rattler is it's not a curved first drop. So it's not like the B&M inverts where they do a full 180-degree turn. It's still going like one direction. It just has little awkward twists and little bends to it that just give it a little bit more extreme feeling. The other thing I want to talk about on this roller coaster is the drop off the quarry wall. Because, man, oh, in the back row, we're talking like El Toro Rolling Thunder levels of ejector airtime. Like, it's not quite the same level, but we're nearing that. And it is just one of the best moments on any RMC, in my opinion. There's some other issues with this roller coaster we'll get into when I talk about the layout, but the two things I really wanted to address was the drop off the quarry wall and the first drop, because they really make this roller coaster what it is. It is just so good. And that drop off the quarry wall, like, I could do that 100 times and never get sick of it. It is just a great ejector airtime filled moment, and it's sustained ejector airtime because it's a decent sized drop, and it is just so much fun and a blast to ride.
I did want to mention that. So I have not ridden this roller coaster and I haven't even been to this park. And so Gabe described this to me, how it was an entire park basically built inside a quarry. And so as a result, you have these like gigantic cliff walls that they then decided to build these roller coasters on top of. And watching a POV of Iron Rattler really speaks to me because it uses that terrain, making it almost a terrain coaster. And I've talked before in this podcast about how I love terrain coasters, and this thing looks so awesome. And then yes, as he was talking in the POV, I could tell just from that one of the best moments on on this ride is that dive back over the quarry wall as you're like, it's kind of like the quad down on Lightning Rod where you got a view of the park and everything because you're up so freaking high. But I think this one is even higher than that.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is it's higher up, and it's just one continuous drop. So you really get that feeling of sustained ejector airtime. And like you said, you do get a good view of the park, but you're so distracted by what this roller coaster's doing to you. You don't even care about that. I mean, this coaster is a lot of fun. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the layout. So, like I said, you drop down off the side of the quarry wall. The first drop kind of goes right next to it, and you dive down, twist back and forth, and you go through a little covered thing, and you pop up into a really good airtime moment, but it's more floater before jumping up into the first wave turn, which is one of the best airtime moments on the ride. After that, you kind of pop up into another dive off the quarry wall. This is the first one, and it's not really an airtime moment. It's more of a kind of just a diving bank turn than anything. And then that's when you pop up into the only inversion on the ride, and that is a 0G roll. And it's actually a really, really good element, but it's more hang time than like 0G in my opinion. And because it is kind of going up on top of the quarry wall, you do lose a lot of speed. And now this is where I have a little bit of a problem with this roller coaster. The elements on top of the quarry wall, well, they are fun, because you're so high up and you're so close to the initial drop height, you lose a ton of speed up here. So you have an airtime hill followed by another mini wave turn, which is all right. And then you pop up into a twist and shout element. Now, the twist and shout element is actually really, really good in the back row. I will say this. But again, you're not going nearly as fast as you would hope so. Before that, you have one more little tiny baby airtime hill before popping up into that quarry wall drop, which, like I said, in the back row is the best airtime moment on the roller coaster. After that, you dive down and you twist into the quarry wall, and you actually go through it. You go like directly into it, through a tunnel that twists up, bends up, and you pop out into the sunlight onto the final brakes. So it's not a very long not a very long roller coaster. You're only talking about 3,000 feet of track, and like I said, it does have its issues. The one thing I will say about this coaster is you have to ride it at the end of the day or when it's the most hot out, and you want a full train. Because if you ride it right away in the morning when it's a little chillier and maybe it's only half a train or 3/4 of a train, you're not going to get the full experience of this roller coaster. And that's one thing I want to stress is you want to ride it while it's warmed up and you want to ride it with a full train. That way it carries its speed better on top of the quarry wall and every element just pops a little bit better in my opinion.
Yeah, I could kind of tell that from the POV too, that you slow down a little bit up there. I think, so even though you slow down up there and it is a little bit, since you lose that speed, it kind of slows down the elements and stuff like that. But I think they did a really good job of sort of giving this ride a grand finale in that hill that drops off the quarry wall. So even though that's, can be a sort of dead spot in the ride, it's still really fun to ride the whole thing because it's like that's not how it ends. It has a really good grand finale. So even though pacing might be a little bit off on the ride, we do have to think about it was RMC's only second conversion. Like Gabe said, they're really experimenting, trying to figure out what their bread and butter is going to be, and they like put in different kinds of elements to see what works, what doesn't. They put in their first inversion on this ride, so we can't really expect it to be their best inversion. And then on top of that, I think it looks like a really good ride. I still want to ride it. It looks cool.
Yeah, it's one of those roller coasters where, 2 or 3 elements are really, really, really good and really make this coaster almost a bucket list coaster. But then there's parts of it too where you're just kind of like, they could have done something better or something else. It's not bad though. It's not. I would never call this roller coaster bad. I would never call those elements on top of the quarry wall bad. Basically, all it does is it affects the pacing of the roller coaster. It really slows it down and kind of draws out that time while you're on top of the quarry wall. And that's my biggest complaint. Is I love coasters that are just back to back to back to back, kind of like Iron Gwazi. I mean, that's what Iron Gwazi is. It's just element after element after element. And that's not really what this coaster is. It's kind of like a tale of two different roller coasters. You have the really extreme elements of the first drop and the dive off the quarry wall. And then you have the tale of some more tamer, slower going elements of the 0G roll and the overbanked curves and the twist and shout element. So they're still good. They're still give you a good dose of airtime and stuff and good forces. It just affects the pacing. That's my biggest complaint about that moments. But other than that, I absolutely love this coaster, and I definitely will go back to Texas to ride it. It is a blast.
Okay, so we need a little bit of Coaster 101 for me. What are wave turns?
Wave turns are an element. Basically, what they are is they're an airtime element where you're sideways.
Okay.
So you kind of, I'm trying to think of a coaster that has a really good wave turn. Lightning Rod. Lightning Rod. The second element on the coaster is a wave turn. Basically what it is you're basically turning to a certain direction, going up, and then it banks you completely 90 degrees sideways.
Okay.
But then continues to climb and then peaks. Like the peak of the airtime moment, you're still 90 degrees.
Yeah.
And then you start going back towards the ground, and then you bank back to normal. You get what I'm saying?
Yes. I've been saying
RMC...
that... Yeah.
RMC does wave turns really, really well. It's kind of an RMC element. B&M has been starting to dive into wave turns. So, Orion, that we rode at Kings Island, that their newest Giga, that has a wave turn on it. And then Intamin does them, but not quite as often. But they're really an RMC element just because they're an airtime focused element.
Yeah. I was gonna say, doing research on, especially with this episode, doing two different RMCs. I've been seeing a lot of them, and I didn't know that's what they were called. And like when I did my rundown of Wildcats layouts, I called them banked curves because I'm like, well, they're not overbanked because you're not above 90 degrees. But I'm like, I don't think they're just banked curves. Or Gabe will know what they are. I'll just ask him.
Wildcats Revenge has a ton of them. I want to say it has at least 3 or 4. I have to go back and watch the full POV again. But I has multiple moments where you could call it a wave turn for sure. Oh, speaking of Wildcats Revenge, why don't we talk about that coaster?
Yeah, so Wildcats Revenge, I took a solo trip to Hershey Park. If anybody's listened to our past episodes, we were originally planning a trip to Hershey Park, but then El Toro opened and then King Ka also opened. So we're like, yeah, we're going to that park for Gabe's birthday trip, and we ended up going there. So I ended up hitting this park on my way back from Maine back to Wisconsin. And oh my god, should be a bucket list park for any roller coaster nerd out there. It's got some really, really good ones. But to talk about Wildcats Revenge, so like we said in the beginning, it's one of the newest RMCs built out there. And oh my god, okay, it's obviously their newest coaster at Hershey Park, which meant the line was up the wazoo. I did get the Flash Pass, but of course, like if anybody's ever used the Flash Pass, it doesn't get you to like the front of the line right away. It gets you into like that one section where they let in a portion of people, and then you still have to wait in like a little tiny line. And when you get up to the top, because this is such a new ride and stuff, they have someone sitting there telling you where to go. And so I looked at this lady. It was going to be this. Oh, I also have to mention this was my 100th credit. Okay. So I was looking at this lady and I'm like, I know like 99% of the time RMCs are better in the back row. So I looked at this lady and I go, can I please get the back row? She looked at me and went, no. And I got a middle seat on this ride. And let me tell you, I was so mad. But then I rolled the freaking coaster and I was like, holy bejesus, I didn't even need a back row. This thing is freaking crazy. The pacing on it is absolutely insane. It has 4 inversions, and one of them is this really weird inversion. We talk about that with RMC. They do weird stuff, and we end up loving it. And so one of their inversions, what I saw it called was a step under flip. And I'll go into what it does when I talk about the layout, but just the pacing on this thing, all of the elements hit. There's absolutely no dead spots on this coaster. I was hooting and hollering and raving about this thing the instant that I got off of it. It was so much fun to ride.
Yeah, really, what you're looking at when you look at Wildcats Revenge is RMC. The one thing that's really impressive with this coaster is number one, the height, and the number one, the amount of elements they stuffed into this roller coaster. Because you're only talking about 140 feet, and the original Wildcat was not that long of a roller coaster to begin with. So they didn't have a lot of space, they didn't have a lot of track, and they didn't have a lot of original supports to work with. And they were still able, in 3,500 feet of track, to put 4 different inversions, multiple airtime moments, multiple wave turn moments. And this coaster, like you said, is just looks from the POV alone, just every element is just back. It looks basically to me like a mini version of Iron Gwazi. I think that'd be a really, really good thing to call.
Oh yeah, so Gabe talks about Zadra and how that's like the big brother of Iron Gwazi over in Europe. Well, this one is like Iron Gwazi's little brother. And he's exactly right. It's a lot shorter. It's, well, not a lot shorter, but 500 feet shorter. It's 2,510 feet of track. It's only 140 feet tall. It only has a drop of 82 degrees. And I think we were talking about Iron Gwazi. That's 91 degrees. So that's steeper than straight down. And this one only reaches a top speed of 62 miles per hour. But it's still, RMC is just at this point got really, really good at utilizing what space that they have. So even though it's shorter, even though it's not as steep, they managed to fit 4 inversions into that space. And at the same time, 62 miles per hour sounds slower, but when you actually ride this ride, it does not feel slower either. it just, I can't even put into words the kind of pacing that this thing has. And it never lets you sit there and think about what just happened to you. I had to ride the coaster like 4 times to even be like, what the hell just happened? And it just is so good. Every time that I rode it, it was so good.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a really fun coaster. There was definitely a reason why we wanted to go and originally ride this for my birthday trip. It's definitely on the list of coasters I need to ride. Obviously, Sky Rush is another one at Hershey Park that I need to ride. But yeah, it just pacing is off the charts on this thing, and like you said, this is RMC's culmination of the last 10 years of development and engineering. And like you said, they really figured out what they're doing, and this is really what we're going to be able to expect from RMC in the future. I really want to see some more ground up stuff from RMC. That's something I do want to point out. Is both of these are conversions. So Wildcats Revenge was originally Wildcat. Iron Rattler was originally just the Rattler. So eventually they're going to run out of coasters to redo. They're going to run out of wooden coasters. But I want to see some more like ground up builds from RMC, just where they don't have any constraints on the layout. They don't have any constraints on where to put the station and how tall or how big to make something. And that's what Zadra is. Zadra's a ground up construction over in Europe, and I want to see a lot more from RMC in that category, because I think once you really just give them an open checkbook and an open plot of land where they can do whatever they want, they are going to surpass, I think, everyone. I mean, RMC is really kind of like one of the best coaster manufacturers, and if you give them a blank checkbook and an open floor plan to do whatever they want, I mean, good luck trying to beat them.
Yeah, they would literally go nuts. Well, one video that we also watched too would be something like if they RMC'd like American Eagle or something, just because that is such a massive ride that it would be the same thing. They could basically do whatever they wanted, but at the same time, that's kind of what Gabe was talking about, is you'd have to give them an open checkbook because it is so large, it wouldn't be saving any money if they redid that ride. So
no, absolutely not. Why don't you go ahead and dive into this layout? Otherwise, we're going to run out of time and you won't even be able to talk about it. So,
sounds good. Let me get into this real quick. So, I will say this: RMCs. This one has a good little pre-lift section. You get a slight left out of the station. You get 2 small off-axis airtime hills into a banked turn to the right, which leads you into that lift hill. And it's got a good amount of speed. It kind of shoves you into that lift hill and you click in and it goes slow and then accelerates towards the top. And then it's a 140-foot drop, 82 degrees, brings you to that top speed of 62 miles per hour, which then you drop down and it brings you right into that step under flip. And the best way I can describe this element is it's basically a roll, but instead of doing the full 360 degrees, you only do 270. So basically, instead of coming back down to straight flat, you come back down and you're still sideways, and then it goes back off this hill. So after this element, you get a slight curve to the right that brings you up into a good airtime hill, and you have a small pop before you get the first of the the first of the inversions. It's a 0G stall. One thing I will note about this is it is a very quick element. You get kind of shoved through this 0G stall. You don't get it's not anything like Goliath, and so it's really kind of there for a couple seconds and you feel it and then you're through it. After that, you do get oh my gosh, I cannot talk. A wave turn to the right that pops you into a hill. You get good ejector airtime on this hill so me and Gabe were having a conversation about this, because to me, when I was watching a POV, it looked like a straight piece of track. Okay. And then, but I was like, when I think about riding this ride, there were no dead moments. So what the heck is this piece of track? I thought maybe it was a brake run, but then Gabe was like, no, it's too short for a brake run. And we were looking at it and it actually turns and you get some really good laterals. So basically it pops up onto this hill, but before you go down, it's got this weird curved piece of track. And then you're dropped back down. And what Gabe managed to figure out was actually going over your final brake run. And that's why it's kind of this weird little element, and it looks really weird on a POV. But you actually get some really good forces on it. And then, as we were saying before, it's just a staple of RMC. They do weird stuff and we end up loving it. So then after this really kind of weird thing, you then drop off, you get a small dose of airtime there before you go into the first 0G roll. You then get another wave turn that leads into the second of the 0G rolls. You get a curve to the right, 2 small airtime hills that then bring you into those final breaks. So just from that layout, you can see that there are no dead moments in this ride. You're constantly either being pulled right, left, up, down, or you're being left there to float in nowhere's land. And it just is so good. It was so good every time that I rode it. And every time I went into those final breaks, I was just like, oh my god, I wish I could just stay on this thing forever.
It really looks like, just like I said, a pacing monster, back-to-back elements, but just just such a good job of just packing in element after element after element into a very, very small layout. And they're very unique elements. It's not like Steel Vengeance where it's just bunny hop, bunny hop, bunny hop, bunny hop, bunny hop. They all have their little, like that moment you're talking about where it kind of pops up and then turns a little bit and then dives back down. And then like one airtime hill is going to the left, this one's going to the right, this one's a little bit taller, maybe this one's got more banking to it. They're all unique elements. And I think that's what I really, really love about watching a POV of Wildcats Revenge and why I want to ride it so bad myself is not every element, even if it's just an airtime hill or a curve or an inversion, they all have a slight little tweak or difference or bounce to it that makes it feel different than the last thing you just went through. And I think that really speaks volumes to how creative RMC can be with their current construction designs and all that stuff, and how much they've really developed the trade of designing their roller coasters.
Now, something I do want to mention, because I feel like we've talked about quite a few RMCs, and we don't quite talk about this with them, but something I personally actually really love about RMCs is I like the way they look. And now, if you've never looked at an RMC, which I can't know how you haven't, but if you haven't, what they are is they have wooden supports. Some of the newer ones also incorporate like steel supports on top of that, but then they have their signature iBox track, which is where the wheels of the trains go, and that's usually so they leave the wood just plain wood, but then the track itself is usually colored, and it's usually themed sort of to where it is. So like Iron Rattler is beautiful wooden supports, and then it's got this bright orange track. And then Wildcats Revenge, I think, looks absolutely freaking gorgeous because it has the wooden supports, and then the steel that they have on top of it is black, and then they have bright red track. But if we even think about some of the other ones, like Goliath has the orange track as well, which looks really nice. Iron Gwazi has purple track.
Iron Gwazi is one of my favorite coasters to look at ever. Yes. It is just such a gorgeous, gorgeous coaster. You got Twisted Cyclone as brown track, I think, which looks kind of goofy.
That would look kind of goofy because the wood itself is already brown. The one that I'm thinking of, I think, has white supports, and then it has green track and blue track, and that's because it's like the RMC dueling one. And I can't think of what it's called. Or am I going crazy?
Oh, the one out in California. Twisted Cyclone.
Thank you. Yeah.
No. Twisted Colossus. Colossus. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I got so many fucking names.
No, I know. And I can't remember the name of it, but I remember what it looks like, because that one also has a really cool look to it, too, with the white supports instead.
Yeah, it's got white supports, and then half of the track is green, and half of the track is blue, I think.
I think so, yeah. That's what I remember.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. You could talk about Airy Force One, which is a gorgeous coaster that they just built down in Georgia that we have to go experience at some point. It is fully steel supports that are all white, and then one piece of track is red, and then one piece of track is blue. So it's red, white, and blue.
Oh, I think I've seen pictures of that or video or something.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, that looks cool.
That's another good, gorgeous looking RMC. But yeah, I would totally agree with that. The only ugly RMC is Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City, because it's brown on brown, but it's their steel topper track. It's not the iBox track.
Oh, okay.
So then it's like really, like, it looks like an actual wooden roller coaster.
Okay.
That one does. But yeah, definitely, I would agree with that. And Wildcats Revenge is just eye-popping. That bright red track, you can see it in the POV. I imagine when you see it in the park, it just pops out of the landscape. And I would definitely, agree with that.
But with that, I think we're going to have to get to the end of our episode here. And as much as Iron Rattler looks like a really cool ride and a really cool terrain coaster, and its setting is really cool, Wildcat just takes it a little bit further, and it really is the culmination of RMC's work at this point.
Wildcats Revenge, it just seems like a more complete ride in my opinion. Just every element really pops. The pacing's really good. Iron Rattler, as good as the first drop and the drop off the quarry wall is, which would probably be better than some of the moments on Wildcats Revenge. The rest of the roller coaster is a little bit lackluster. I will say this, those trains on the Iron Rattler are really pushing it ahead on this one. But at the end of the day, I definitely got to take Wildcats Revenge on this one. Just 10 more years of innovation, 10 more years of experimenting, more inversions, better pacing, and just an overall better ride experience. I think definitely going to have to take Wildcats Revenge on this one.
Oh, yeah. And just before we run out of time here, I do want to plug next week's episode. This is going to be a special episode where we quiz Gabe.
No, it's not. It's not special. No. I think this is unfair.
We gotta try.
Whose idea was this?
It was your own idea, so don't even come from me.
Oh, it was?
Yes, it totally was. But, so this is we're gonna ask Gabe as many questions as we can think of to try and stump him. But at the same time, it's also no stupid questions. If you really just are, you maybe just getting into roller coasters and you're like, I have no idea what the hell a chain lift is. You know what? No stupid questions. You want to know what a chain lift is? I'll ask Gabe.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I do want to mention, though, is don't pull anything, like, out of left field, like, how tall is this roller coaster? Or, like, stuff like that. I might not be able to answer that. I mean, I could try my best. I can give you an estimate, but I'm not going to be able to just pull that out of thin air unless you really want to make me upset during the episode. But it's just a little tidbit there.
Yeah. It's just kind of geared more towards educational, let's learn some stuff about coasters together, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like the idea of the whole no dumb questions things too, or just if you have something you honestly don't know, I'll try to answer it as best as I can. But no Google, no internet, not even notes. I'm going to have no prep work. I'm literally just going to come into this episode, choose you to shoot me questions, and I'm going to try and answer them to the best of my ability. I think it's going to be very entertaining just to try and see if you guys can get me off track or stop me or whatever. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really do. So.
Oh, yeah. So if you have any questions, submit them to coasterwarspodcast@gmail.com. I will go through, I'll pick some, and we'll shoot them towards Gabe, and that'll be our special episode next week. But with that, join us for that special episode next week.
Question everything.